My son Kevin held up the quilt I'd spent 6 months making, in front of all his polished friends from the country club, standing on his perfect manicured lawn next to a mountain of shiny gifts from Amazon. He gave it a little shake. Every one of the 1,000 tiny hexagons was hand-stitched. In the corner, I'd embroidered my granddaughter's name, Lily, and her birth date, a secret constellation of love just for her. "Isn't that quaint?" he said, the word dripping with a smile that never reached his eyes. A few of his friends chuckled. My face burned. He turned to me, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear over the hum of the giant unicorn bouncy castle. "Mom, the theme was unicorns, not the Great Depression." "Tiffany," he called to my daughter-in-law, "let's go open the real presents." He didn't just put it down, he tossed it, a cascade of color and 600 hours of my life, onto a patio chair already piled with discarded paper plates. He walked away without a backward glance, leaving me standing there while my granddaughter tore the wrapping off a dollhouse bigger than my first apartment. He thought it was just a blanket. He had no idea it was the last straw. But that single, cruel comment wasn't the start of our story. It was just the moment I finally decided how it was going to end. To understand how we reached that breaking point, you have to see the whole pattern, thread by painful thread. The first of those threads was spun 15 years ago, but I'm getting ahead of myself. First, there was the drive home from the party. I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic through the manicured streets of Kevin's neighborhood, where every lawn looked like a green carpet and the mailboxes had little brass house numbers. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that made the enormous houses look like sleeping giants. On the passenger seat next to me, the quilt lay in a heap of defiant color. I'd folded it neatly when I left, but the sharp turn out of his gated community had sent it tumbling. I left it there. A mess. It felt right. My hands felt steady on the worn leather of the steering wheel. I wasn't crying. The time for tears had passed somewhere between him tossing my gift aside and my granddaughter gleefully unboxing a life-sized plastic pony. The hurt was still there. A cold, heavy stone in my gut, but something else was settling over it, a quiet, chilling clarity. The kind I used to get late at night in my office at the school district, right before I'd find the one number in a 1,000-page budget that didn't add up, the number that told the real story. I replayed his words. Quaint. The way it curled off his tongue, a dismissal wrapped in a compliment. The Great Depression. A joke to his friends, the ones in their cashmere sweaters and Italian shoes, a joke at the expense of a woman who actually remembered her own parents telling her stories about it. He didn't just insult the quilt. He insulted my entire life, my entire generation. He had taken 40 years of my hard work, my careful savings, my sensible choices, and dismissed it all as a punchline. As if my life, the one that had provided the foundation for his, was nothing more than a dusty, embarrassing relic. I passed the Northwood Community College campus, its low brick buildings glowing under the parking lot lights. And just like that, the memory I'd kept packed away for years came rushing back. The scene wasn't a manicured lawn. It was the small, linoleum-floored kitchen of my 2-bedroom townhouse. The countertops were a pale yellow formica, and a calendar from my local credit union hung on the fridge. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because that was the night I always sat down to pay the bills. The table was a sea of envelopes and stress. The mortgage, the car insurance, the electric bill. My salary as a junior auditor for the school district was steady, but it wasn't extravagant. I made it work. I always made it work. Spread out next to my bank statement was a glossy travel brochure. The Grand Canyon, it declared in bold letters. For my 50th birthday, I was going to treat myself. A 4-day guided tour. I'd traced the itinerary with my finger 100 times. A sunset hike along the South Rim, a mule ride down to the canyon floor, a night under a sky so full of stars you couldn't find a patch of black. It was the one big, wild, just-for-me thing I had ever planned. Kevin came in then. He was 23, all lanky energy and nervous ambition. He had that fire in his eyes that young men get when they think they're about to conquer the world. He dropped a course catalog from the community college onto the table, right on top of my electric bill. "This is it, Mom," he'd said, his voice brimming with a desperate kind of hope. "The real estate certification course. 6 weeks. It's everything I need to get my license. People are making a fortune flipping houses. This is how I get started. This is how I take care of you one day." I looked at the tuition fee listed in the catalog. Then I looked at the balance in my checking account. They were not friends. I picked up the Grand Canyon brochure, the glossy paper cool against my fingertips. I could feel the dry desert air, smell the ponderosa pines. Kevin saw where I was looking. "Mom, once I get going, I'll send you to the Grand Canyon 10 times over, first class." He believed it, and God help me, I wanted to believe it too. I wanted him to have the life he dreamed of, the life I couldn't give him on a civil servant's salary. That's the most dangerous drug in the world for a parent, your child's potential. You'd sacrifice anything to protect it. So I did. I didn't say a word. I just opened the kitchen drawer, the one filled with old warranties and takeout menus, and I slid the Grand Canyon brochure inside. The soft thud of it landing at the bottom was the sound of a door closing. I pulled out my checkbook. My hand didn't shake as I wrote out the check to the college for an amount that would make the next 3 months very, very tight. I tore it from the book with a clean, crisp sound and handed it to him. A week later, I took him to JCPenney to buy his first suit. He stood in front of the mirror in a charcoal gray suit that made him look older, more serious. He looked like a success. I remember the pride swelling in my chest, a painful, beautiful feeling. It was so strong it almost made me forget the sick little lurch in my stomach when the cashier rang up the total and I handed over my credit card. That suit, that single suit, cost more than my car payment and my groceries for the month combined. I pulled into my own driveway, the engine of the Honda rattling a little before I turned it off. The silence that followed was heavy. My house isn't big, it's not in a gated community, but every brick of it was paid for with my own sweat and diligence. It was mine. A testament to a life lived responsibly. I looked over at the quilt on the passenger seat. All those hours, all those tiny, perfect stitches, creating a pattern of warmth and love out of scraps. That's what I had tried to do for him, for our family. I'd patched the holes, covered the thin spots, stitched together a life for him out of my own sacrifices. And he had just tossed it aside. The hurt was still there, but the auditor in me was fully awake now, the cold, clear part of my brain that deals not in emotions, but in facts and figures. For 15 years, I had carried that sacrifice as a credit on his account, an investment made out of love. But sitting there, in the quiet darkness of my car, I finally looked at the ledger. I saw the check for the tuition, the charge for the suit, the ghost of a trip never taken, and I saw his life of luxury, built on a foundation I had laid. He thought that debt had been forgiven and forgotten. He had no idea I kept a perfect record of everything. The next entry in that ledger was written less than 24 hours later. I was in my kitchen, the Sunday morning sun streaming through the window above the sink. The house was quiet. The only sounds were the gentle drip of my Mr. coffee machine and the rustle of the local newspaper spread across my small kitchen table. I was halfway through the crossword puzzle, a simple, orderly ritual that felt like the exact opposite of the chaos from the day before. For a few minutes, I felt a sense of peace. My peace, in my house. Then I heard the sound of a key in the front door. Kevin didn't knock. He hadn't knocked in years. He breezed in like he owned the place, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on my clean linoleum floor. The smell of his cologne, something sharp and musky that probably cost a fortune, immediately filled my small home, overpowering the simple aroma of my coffee. He was dressed in a navy blue suit, tailored so perfectly it looked like it was sewn onto him. A walking advertisement for success, standing in the middle of my modest, sensible life. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice bright and completely untroubled, as if yesterday hadn't happened, as if he hadn't taken a piece of my heart and tossed it on a pile of trash. He placed a cardboard cup from some trendy downtown coffee shop on the table. "Got you a vanilla latte, the real stuff." I looked from the fancy cup to my simple white ceramic mug, half full of black coffee. I didn't want his vanilla latte. I didn't want his pity gift, his cheap attempt to smooth things over without actually apologizing. But I smiled. A thin, tight smile that I'm sure didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you, Kevin. That was thoughtful." He sat down opposite me, pushing my newspaper aside to make room. He talked for 5 minutes straight about a new watch he was thinking of buying, about a dinner he'd had at a steakhouse where the bill was more than my monthly electric payment. I just nodded and sipped my coffee. I let his vanilla latte grow cold between us. Then he reached down and pulled a thick, glossy folder from his briefcase. The front was emblazoned with a gold logo for his company, KD Properties. "So," he began, his tone shifting from casual to purposeful. "Got a little opportunity I wanted to run by you. It's for my new development, Evergreen Point. It's going to be my masterpiece, Mom. Biggest deal of my career." He spun the folder around so it faced me. "We're just finalizing the financing. We have the big investors lined up, but there's a small gap, a bridge loan, just to get the construction started before the big money comes through. It's standard stuff. The bank just needs a little extra security. A formality, really." He opened the folder. Inside was a stack of papers at least an inch thick, full of dense paragraphs and tiny print. He slid a single page from the bottom of the stack and a heavy, expensive-looking pen across the table. "I just need your signature right here, as a co-signer." My entire body went still. For 40 years my job had been to read documents exactly like this, to find the risks hidden in the fine print, to protect the school district from bad deals and hidden clauses. My hand reached out for the main stack of papers. "Let me just have a look at the terms, Kevin. It is a Fanstead?" His hand shot out and covered mine, stopping it from touching the documents. It was a gentle pressure, but it was absolute. A cage. "Mom, come on," he laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "It's just boilerplate, lawyer stuff. You don't need to bore yourself with all that." I slowly pulled my hand from under his. "I'd feel more comfortable if I just understood what I'm signing." He sighed, the sound of a patient man dealing with a difficult child. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, soothing tone. The kind of voice you use on someone who is confused. "Look, it's simple. I'm the primary signer. You're just the backup. The bank will never even look at you. It's just a box they need to check. Don't worry your pretty little head about the details, trust me." "Don't worry my pretty little head." The phrase hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. He wasn't just talking to his mother. He was talking to a woman who had managed multi-million-dollar school budgets before he even knew how to balance a checkbook. He saw me as a prop, an old woman with a good credit score to be used and then put back on the shelf. I looked at his face, so earnest and handsome. But for the first time, I saw the flicker in his eyes, the tiny bead of sweat on his temple. The auditor in me saw it all. He wasn't just being condescending, he was actively hiding something. I knew that if I pushed, he'd find another way, another angle of attack. The sleeping giant inside me knew this wasn't the time to roar. It was the time to watch and to listen. So I gave in. "All right, sweetheart, if you say it's fine." Relief washed over his face so quickly it was almost comical. He beamed at me, his perfect son persona snapping back into place. "Great, I knew you'd understand." I reached for the pen, but as I did, my elbow accidentally bumped my coffee mug. The dark liquid sloshed across the table, right towards his precious documents. He yelped and jumped back, frantically grabbing the glossy folder while I rushed to get a paper towel. In the chaos, as he fumbled with the papers, trying to keep them from getting wet, a few pages slipped from his grasp and scattered onto the floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, bending down to help him, and that's when I saw it. My eyes, trained to scan and find anomalies in an instant, snagged on a line of text on one of the fallen pages. It wasn't a big bank name. It was the lender. A name created to sound bland and forgettable. Evergreen Point Funding, LLC. An LLC, a limited liability company, set up just for this? It was a classic red flag. A shell to hide who was really behind the money. I scooped up the page and handed it back to him, my expression a perfect mask of harmless concern. He gathered his papers, signed page safely in hand, and stood up, all smiles again. "No harm done. Thanks, Mom. You're a real lifesaver." He kissed the top of my head and was out the door, the smell of his victory and his cologne left behind. I stood there in the silence of my kitchen. I picked up the fancy coffee cup he'd brought me and, without even a moment of hesitation, poured the cold, sweet latte down the drain. Then, I walked over to the little desk in the corner of my living room, took out a clean spiral notebook, and opened it to the first page. At the top, I wrote today's date, and underneath it, I wrote the first entry. Evergreen Point Funding, LLC. I stared at the name I had written down in the notebook. Evergreen Point Funding, LLC. It was a perfectly bland and corporate-sounding name, the kind you'd see on 1,000 signs in 1,000 office parks across the country. But to me, It felt like a siren. For 40 years, my job had been to protect the public's money. I'd audited cafeteria supply contracts, school bus maintenance records, and multi-million-dollar construction bonds for new high schools. My entire career was built on the simple principle that things must add up. You follow the money, and you trust the details. And the details of this LLC felt all wrong. It was a loose thread on a very expensive suit, and my fingers just itched to pull it. I left my half-finished crossword puzzle on the table and walked over to the small desk in the corner of my living room. My setup wasn't fancy, just an old Dell desktop that took a few minutes to wake up, its fan humming a familiar, drowsy tune. The office chair I'd bought at a garage sale 10 years ago sighed as I sat down. This little corner was my command center. It was where I had organized a lifetime of PTA fundraisers, balanced my own meticulous budget, and, after I retired, learned how to trace my family's ancestry back to the 1700s. It was a place for patient, methodical work. The computer chimed to life. I opened the web browser and typed the name into the search bar. Evergreen Point Funding, LLC. The results were exactly what I expected, and exactly what I feared. Nothing. No corporate website. No mention in the business journals. Just a single dry registration link on the Secretary of State's database. A ghost. A shell. An LLC, a limited liability company, is a common business tool, but it's also a favorite for people who want to move money around without revealing who is really holding the purse strings. Kevin was smart, but he wasn't this smart. Someone else was pulling his strings. My real work began at the Clarion County Clerk's Public Records Portal. You know how these government websites are. They look like they were designed in 1998 and then completely forgotten about. The county seal was a pixelated mess, the navigation links were confusing, and the search function was a joke. I knew from experience that you couldn't just type in what you were looking for. You had to know the system's language. My first search for the LLC name came up blank. No records found. Of course, that would be too easy. I sat back, tapping my finger on the desk. The hunter in me, the part that had once spent 3 days tracking a 10-cent discrepancy in a transportation budget, began to wake up. Okay, Carol, I thought to myself. If you can't find the buyer, find the thing they bought. I started a new search, this time for the property itself. Evergreen Point. Again, nothing. The system wasn't set up for commercial names. It needed parcel numbers, the unique strings of digits the county assigns to every single piece of land. I went to the developers page on the county planning website. After 10 minutes of clicking through zoning applications and environmental impact reports, I found it. A long, beautiful string of numbers. I copied it. Back at the records portal, I pasted the parcel number into the search box and hit enter. Bingo. A page loaded with the entire history of that piece of land, going all the way back to when it was just a field of overgrown grass. It was all there in black and white, a digital breadcrumb trail. I felt a familiar thrill, the quiet excitement of the chase. I scrolled to the most recent entry, title transfer to KD Properties, Kevin's company. The sale price was listed, and it made my jaw drop. He'd told me he was successful, but this was a number with a lot of zeros. That explained the bridge loan, but it didn't explain where the initial capital had come from. An auditor never stops at the first page. The real story is always in the footnotes, in the history. My eyes scanned up the page to the previous transaction, the one where KD Properties had acquired the land. Only, they hadn't bought it from the original farmer, they had bought it from another company, a partnership. I clicked the link, and there it was, the deed for the initial purchase of the land from the farmer. The buyers were listed as a general partnership. I saw Kevin's name, clear as day. I saw the name of another developer I recognized from the newspaper. And then I saw the third line. It didn't have a name, it just had a title. Undisclosed investment partner. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned so close to the screen I could see the dust on the monitor. An undisclosed partner. In a private land deal for a development that would require massive public zoning changes. This wasn't just a red flag anymore. This was a 5-alarm fire. This was the kind of secret that people went to jail for. Who was he protecting? Who had fronted the money for this deal and wanted their name kept off the books? My heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't about a spoiled son or a handmade quilt anymore. This was big. This was dangerous. My training took over. I downloaded the PDF of the deed. I saved it to a folder on my desktop. I labeled gardening. Then I printed a hard copy, the quiet whir of my old printer filling the room. I took the single warm sheet of paper and held it in my hands. It felt heavy, like a piece of evidence. I walked back to my kitchen table and opened my spiral notebook. Underneath the name of the LLC, I drew a small box. Inside it, I wrote KD Properties. Then I drew another box next to it and wrote the name of the partnership from the deed. I connected them with an arrow. And underneath them both, I drew a third, larger box. I connected it to the partnership with a dotted line. Inside that box, I didn't write a name. I just drew a big, bold question mark. The woman who had been hurt at the birthday party was gone. The mother who had sacrificed her dreams for her son was gone. Sitting there, in the quiet of my kitchen, with the evidence laid out before me, I was someone else entirely. I was Auditor Davis. And I had just opened a case. That question mark I drew in my notebook was more than just a placeholder. It was a mission. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of the old fire, the quiet, relentless focus that had defined my professional life. The hurt from the party hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It had crystallized from a messy, sprawling grief into a single, hard point of purpose. I wasn't just a scorned mother anymore. I was an auditor, and I had just opened a case. This new purpose felt clean, logical. It was a problem to be solved, an equation to be balanced. I spent the next 2 days in my little office corner, cross-referencing names, dates, and corporate filings. The world outside my window faded away. I was in my element. And then, on Wednesday afternoon, the phone rang, shattering the productive silence. I saw the name on the caller ID, Tiffany. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Carol, hi. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," she began, her voice a syrupy sweet melody that always set my teeth on edge. It was the voice of someone who had never been told no in her life. "Hello, Tiffany. I was just tidying up," I lied. "Oh, good. Listen, you would be doing me the most enormous favor. Kevin and I are having some of his most important investors over for a barbecue this weekend. Just a casual thing, but you know how it is. Everything has to be perfect. My Costco card actually expired, isn't that the silliest thing? I haven't had a second to renew it. I was hoping would you be an absolute angel and pop over there for me? I have a list." I stood there, holding the phone, looking at the complex web of corporate ownership I had been mapping out in my notebook, and here was this woman asking me to go on a grocery run. The sheer, breathtaking triviality of it was almost funny. "I'm a little busy, Tiffany," I started to say. "It won't take long," she chirped, completely ignoring my hesitation. "I'll text you the list. Just swing by the house first. Kevin will have the cash ready for you." "Thanks a million. You're a total lifesaver." And then she hung up. Not a question, but a royal decree. An hour later, I found myself standing on their marble entryway, not even invited inside. The housekeeper, a young woman with tired eyes, handed me a crisp white envelope before quietly closing the door. I walked back to my car, the afternoon sun feeling hot and angry on my skin. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the envelope. Inside was a wad of cash. I counted it. $254. I pulled up the text from Tiffany. It was a long list of specific, expensive items. I did a quick mental calculation. $254 was probably the exact total, right down to the penny. There was nothing extra for gas to drive across town, nothing for the hour and a half this wild goose chase would take out of my day. I was not a mother-in-law doing a favor. I was a TaskRabbit, an Instacart shopper, working for free. The Costco parking lot was a battlefield, as always. I had to circle for 10 minutes before I found a spot way out in the back 40. Inside, the sheer scale of the place felt like an assault. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the air was thick with the smell of rotisserie chickens and industrial floor cleaner. I grabbed one of the giant wobbly shopping carts and began the mission. Tiffany's list was a portrait of their life. 2 family-sized packs of Angus ribeye steaks, a wheel of French brie so large it could have been used as a spare tire, a case of that Pellegrino sparkling water in the green glass bottles, organic kale, wild-caught salmon, a bag of avocados that were all, she had specified in the text, perfectly ripe, not too hard. I navigated the vast concrete aisles, feeling more and more like a stranger in a foreign land. I saw a young couple about Kevin's age, laughing as they debated which giant bag of tortilla chips to buy. I saw a mother with 2 kids in her cart, patiently explaining why they couldn't get the 3-pound tub of gummy bears. I was invisible here, a ghost pushing a cart full of someone else's life. The last item on the list was the tequila. Tiffany's text was precise. Get the big silver bottle of Patron. The investors are particular. I found the liquor section, a locked cage of glass and steel. There it was. A bottle of tequila that cost more than my entire weekly grocery budget, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. At the checkout, the cashier scanned everything with brisk efficiency. The final total came up on the little screen, $255.12. $1.12 over what Tiffany had given me. I didn't say a word. I just took the cash from the envelope, added $1.25 from my own wallet, and paid. The final, tiny insult. It took me 3 trips to unload everything from my car onto their gleaming, stainless steel outdoor kitchen island. Kevin was nowhere to be seen. I stacked the steaks, arranged the cheeses, and lined up the sparkling water. Finally, just as I was about to leave, he emerged from the house, phone pressed to his ear. He was laughing about something with the person on the other end. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't thank me. He just walked over to the groceries, his eyes scanning them like a general reviewing his troops. He picked up the expensive bottle of tequila, holding it up to the light. He frowned. Still on his call, he turned the bottle around, and without even looking at me, he spoke into the air. Did they not have the silver? This is the reposado. The investors drink the silver. Then, he put the bottle down, turned his back to me, and walked back toward the house, still deep in his conversation. I stood alone on their perfect flagstone patio. The smell of chlorine from their crystal blue pool was sharp in the air. The only sound was the murmur of his voice fading as the sliding glass door whispered shut behind him. I had been summoned, used, and dismissed, and I had failed. I had bought the wrong kind of tequila. I got in my car. The slow burn in my gut was now a raging fire. I drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That night, I opened my notebook again. Underneath the flowchart of his corrupt business, I made a new entry. It wasn't about money. It was a debt of a different kind. I wrote down the date, and next to it, I just wrote, the tequila. He was nickel and diming my soul, and I decided then and there the interest on that debt was going to be astronomical. I just never imagined I'd be in a position to collect so soon. The barbecue was the following Saturday. When Tiffany had said casual, she apparently meant casual for royalty. I arrived to find their backyard transformed. A bartender was polishing glasses behind a portable tiki bar. Music drifted from hidden speakers that looked like rocks, and the smell of Angus beef sizzling on a grill the size of my first car filled the air. Kevin, playing the role of the charismatic host, was holding court by the pool with a group of men in expensive linen shirts and ridiculously heavy-looking watches. Tiffany, gliding across the patio in a white sundress, saw me, and her perfect smile faltered for just a second. It was clear she hadn't expected me to actually come, just to run the errand. "Carol, you made it," she said, kissing the air next to my cheek. "Listen, you're an absolute doll for doing that shopping. Things are just so hectic. Would you mind giving me a little hand in the kitchen? I just need to get these limes sliced up for the drinks before things get really crazy." And just like that, I was dismissed. Not a guest, but staff. I spent the next hour in their cavernous kitchen, looking out the panoramic sliding glass door as if I were watching a nature documentary about the migration habits of the ridiculously wealthy. The sound of their loud, easy laughter floated in, punctuated by the clinking of ice in heavy cocktail glasses. I focused on my task. The sharp, clean scent of the limes, the rhythmic thump of my knife against the wooden cutting board, the sticky, acidic juice on my fingers. I was a ghost in my own son's house, methodically slicing up the garnish for a party I wasn't truly invited to. I was watching Kevin. He was magnificent, in a terrible sort of way. He moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a politician, a backslap here, a shared laugh there. He was selling them something. Not just a condominium development, but a version of himself, a successful, powerful man you could trust with your money. My stomach turned. A man in a pale yellow polo shirt, his face ruddy from the sun, walked past the open kitchen door on his way to the beer cooler on the patio. Another guest, a larger man with a booming voice, clapped him on the shoulder as he passed. "There he is," the big man bellowed. "Drinks are on you tonight, Mr. Chairman." My knife stopped. It was poised halfway through a lime, a perfect green hemisphere. The sounds of the party, the music, the chatter, the splash from the pool, all seemed to rush away, leaving a sudden ringing silence in my ears. I slowly, deliberately placed the knife down on the cutting board. The small clink was the only sound in my world. I looked up. My eyes found the man in the yellow shirt. He was laughing, waving off the comment with a flick of his wrist. I knew that face. I hadn't recognized him at first, out of context and dressed down. But I had seen that face a dozen times in the local paper, usually shaking hands at a groundbreaking ceremony or cutting a ribbon with giant scissors. A public figure, a local official. But what was his name? And what was he chairman of? The pieces were there, floating in my mind, refusing to connect. I felt a surge of frustration. I was so close. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. I finished the limes. I smiled when spoken to. I pretended to admire Tiffany's new patio furniture. All the while, my mind was a machine, churning and whirring, trying to place that man. When it was finally time to leave, I said my goodbyes with a politeness that felt like a costume. I drove home under a sky bruised with twilight, my mind racing. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't make dinner. I walked straight to my desk, my heart thumping a steady, urgent rhythm against my ribs. The spiral notebook was already open to the page with the question mark. The hum of the Dell was a comforting sound. My fingers flew over the keyboard. My first search was simple. Clarion County Board Chairman. Image after image loaded onto the screen. I scrolled through them, and there he was. The man in the yellow polo shirt. His name was Marcus Thorne, and his title made the breath catch in my throat. Chairman, Clarion City Zoning Commission. Zoning, the single most powerful body for a real estate developer. The commission that could approve or deny permits, grant variances, and turn a worthless piece of farmland into a gold mine with a single vote. My hands felt cold. But a suspicion wasn't proof. An auditor needs a paper trail. How could I connect Marcus Thorne to that anonymous partnership? I spent the next hour digging into Thorne's public asset declarations, his house, his cars, his stock portfolio. It was all clean, all meticulously documented. Too clean? I sat back, chewing on my lip. The answer wasn't in the light. It had to be in the shadows. I thought about the documents from the county clerk's office. The partnership, the LLC. They were all filed by the same law firm. A long shot, but it was all I had. I started a new search, this time for property records associated with Marcus Thorne. I found his primary residence easily enough. Then I tried a deeper search for any family trusts. After hitting a dozen dead ends, I found it. The Thorne Family Revocable Trust. It was standard estate planning. But as I scrolled through the digital paperwork, my eyes landed on one name, the attorney of record who had filed the trust documents. My heart stopped. It was the same lawyer. The exact same lawyer who had filed the paperwork for Kevin's partnership and for Evergreen Point Funding, LLC. I stood up from my chair and began to pace my small living room. The pieces weren't floating anymore. They were snapping together with the force of a magnetic pull. The Shell, LLC. The secret partner in the land deal. The chairman of the zoning commission at my son's party. The same lawyer weaving everything together in the background. It wasn't a series of coincidences. It was a conspiracy. A neat, tidy, and utterly illegal loop of corruption. Kevin wasn't just building condos. He was building them with the help of a crooked politician, and the bridge loan I had co-signed was almost certainly the grease for the wheels. It was the bribe. I walked back to the desk, my movements slow and deliberate. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The rage and hurt were still there, but they were now banked, contained, like the core of a nuclear reactor. I picked up my pen. I looked at the big, bold question mark I had drawn in my notebook. With a single, steady stroke, I drew a line through it, and in the space beside it, I wrote the name that completed the equation. Marcus Thorne, zoning chairman. The case wasn't just open anymore. I had my target. But an auditor, like a good hunter, knows you don't just charge into the wilderness. You wait, you watch, you let the target reveal itself, let it walk right into the perfect, inescapable clearing. For a week, a tense, humming silence stretched between my son's world and mine. I spent my days consolidating my research, my spiral notebook now filled with names, dates, and a flowchart of corruption so clear and damning it made my hand tremble to look at it. The pain of his disrespect hadn't gone away, but it had found its proper place. It was no longer a wound. It was a compass needle, pointing me true north. Then, the following Tuesday, the phone rang. It was Kevin. His voice was a supernova of pure, unadulterated ego. He didn't even say hello. "You are looking at the Clarion County Chamber of Commerce's Young Entrepreneur of the Year," he shouted, so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. I was silent for a moment, letting the irony of it wash over me. Entrepreneur of the Year. It was so perfect, so beautifully, horribly perfect. "Well, congratulations, Kevin," I said, my voice even and calm. "It's huge, Mom. The gala is next Friday at the Grandview Hotel. The mayor will be there. Channel 7 News is covering it. This isn't just some plaque for the wall. This puts me on the map. This is the moment Evergreen Point goes from a local project to a legacy." He went on like that for several minutes, a breathless monologue of his own brilliance. I listened patiently, my eyes closed, picturing it all. A hotel ballroom, a stage, a podium with a microphone. A captive audience of the city's most influential people. He wasn't just telling me about his award, he was unwittingly describing the perfect stage for his own execution. "And that's why I need you there," he was saying, his voice shifting from triumphant to conspiratorial. "Front and center, at the head table. I need you there, Mom. The optics are huge. Local boy makes good, supported all the way by his loving mother. You get it. It's the whole package. The family man. It plays great with the older investors." "I see," I thought. "I am not a mother to be celebrated. I am a prop to be leveraged, another asset to be deployed in service of his grand performance." The request was so nakedly self-serving it almost made me laugh. "And hey," he added, his voice dropping into a tone of magnanimous generosity, "buy something nice for once, something elegant. My treat. Seriously, get yourself a new dress. I'll have Tiffany transfer you the money. We can't have you looking like you just came from a PTA meeting." There it was again. The casual, thoughtless cruelty. The constant reminder that my world, the one of sensible shoes and department store dresses bought on sale, was a source of embarrassment to him. He was offering to buy my costume for the part he wanted me to play in his fantasy. A year ago, that comment would have crushed me. A month ago, it would have made me weep with rage. But now, it was just another line item in the ledger. It was fuel. A plan began to form in my mind, swift and clear and terrifyingly simple. The gala, the speech, the cameras. He was building his own guillotine and asking me to polish the blade. "Kevin," I said, and I was surprised by the warmth I managed to inject into my voice. "I am so proud of you. Of course I'll be there." "Great, I knew you would be," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. He was already thinking about his acceptance speech again, I could tell. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I continued, my voice smooth as silk. "In fact, I'm so proud, I'd love to say a few words myself, if they'd let me." There was a pause. "Oh," he said, sounding thrown. "Well, Mom, you don't have to do that. It's not that kind of thing. They'll just want to hear from me." "It wouldn't be long," I said gently, pressing just enough. "Just a minute or two. A few words from a proud mother about her son's journey. Think of the optics, honey." I had used his own language against him. He was silent for a second, considering it. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, weighing the pros and cons. He probably imagined me telling some tearful, heartwarming story about his childhood lemonade stand. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice full of excitement again. "Yeah, actually, that's brilliant. The crowd will eat it up. Okay, Mom, you've got 2 minutes, but keep it short and sweet, okay?" "Don't worry," I said, looking down at the open notebook on my desk, at the damning evidence meticulously recorded in my own neat handwriting. "I'll be sure to make an impact." After we hung up, I didn't go shopping. I didn't need his money. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out the dress I'd worn to my own retirement dinner from the school district. It was a simple, charcoal gray sheath dress. It wasn't flashy or expensive. It was the dress of a woman who was serious, respected, and not to be trifled with. It was my armor. I spent that evening at my desk. I took out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top I wrote, "Remarks for KD." I wasn't writing a speech. I was drafting an indictment. I listed the key exhibits: the initial land deed, the partnership agreement, the LLC filing, the family trust document for Marcus Thorne. I didn't write in paragraphs. I wrote in bullet points. Clean, undeniable fact. I created a neat, simple package, placing copies of all the documents inside a plain manila folder. I didn't need a fancy dress or a new handbag. This folder would be my only accessory. The night before the gala, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, holding the dress up against me. I didn't see a grieving mother or a disrespected old woman. I saw Auditor Davis, on the eve of her most important presentation. The stage was set. The evidence was prepared. My son was expecting a tribute. He had no idea he was about to be the subject of a full, formal, and final audit. The ballroom of the Grandview Hotel was a galaxy of fake diamonds and forced smiles. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted prime rib. Men in tuxedos laughed too loudly, and women in glittering dresses appraised each other over the rims of their wine glasses. I sat at the head table, a small gray sparrow in a flock of peacocks, and felt utterly, completely calm. My charcoal dress was my uniform. The plain manila folder resting in my lap was my weapon. I was not a guest. I was an agent on a mission, and this room was the target. Kevin was at the podium, bathed in a warm, golden spotlight. He was magnificent. I had to give him that. He spoke of vision, of grit, of building a better Clarion County. He thanked his mentors and his business partners. He was charming, humble, and utterly believable. The crowd was captivated. When the mayor handed him the heavy glass award for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, the room erupted in a standing ovation. He let the applause wash over him for a moment, holding the award up like a newborn baby. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "Thank you all. But I can't accept this without acknowledging my first investor, my biggest believer, the woman who sacrificed everything so I could have a chance. My mother, Carol Davis." He turned and beamed at me, his teeth impossibly white in the spotlight. "Mom, would you come up and say a few words?" Polite, enthusiastic applause rippled through the ballroom. Every head turned in my direction. I placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and made the long walk from my chair to the stage. It felt like walking through water. The faces of the guests were a blur, their clapping a distant, rhythmic tide. I clutched my manila folder. Kevin met me at the edge of the stage, enveloping me in a hug that was both possessive and for show. The cameras from Channel 7 flashed. He leaned in, his mouth close to my ear, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey. "Keep it short and sweet, Mom," he whispered. "Make 'em cry." I stepped up to the heavy wooden lectern. The spotlight was hot on my face. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and then I looked at my son, who stood beside me, radiating pride. I placed the manila folder on the lectern and opened it, but I didn't look down. I knew my lines by heart. "My son asked me to say a few words about his journey," I began, my voice soft, just a little shaky. "The perfect, proud mother. And his journey to success began 15 years ago, in our little kitchen. It began with me writing a check from my modest savings so he could get his real estate license. It began with me taking him to JCPenney to buy his first suit, so he could look the part of the successful man he so desperately wanted to be." I could see people in the audience smiling, dabbing at their eyes. Kevin's chest puffed out with pride. This was exactly what he wanted. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. Then, I looked down at my folder, and when I looked back up, my voice had changed. The tremble was gone. It was replaced by the crisp, clear, and emotionless tone of a professional delivering a report. "I was a public school district auditor for 40 years, I said, my voice now carrying to the back of the silent room. "An auditor's job is to verify, to ensure that the story being told matches the numbers on the page. So, as a proud mother, I decided to conduct one last, small audit on my son's magnificent success." Kevin's smile faltered. He took a half step toward me, a confused look on his face. I didn't look at him. I looked at my notes. Exhibit A, the acquisition of the land for the Evergreen Point development. The public records show that the land was not purchased by my son's company, but by a partnership he formed. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. An auditor always looks for anomalies, I continued, my voice steady and sharp. And I found one. A significant portion of the partnership was owned by an undisclosed investment partner. A secret partner. Kevin's face had gone pale. He was staring at me now, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. A development of this size also requires significant financing. My son secured a multi-million-dollar bridge loan from a brand-new entity called Evergreen Point Funding, LLC. An entity with no business history, no other assets, and a registration that is less than 6 months old. Another secret. I let that sink in. I could hear a fork clatter against a plate somewhere in the vast, silent room. An auditor knows that secrets are often connected. And the thread that connects these two secrets, the hidden partner and the mysterious loan, is a single lawyer. The very same lawyer who filed the incorporation papers for the LLC is the managing attorney for the family trust of the secret partner. I finally lifted my head and looked directly at the audience, my eyes scanning the tables until they found him. The man in the expensive suit, his face the color of ash, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. But the real question, the one a good auditor always asks, is why? Why all the secrecy? Perhaps, I said, my voice dropping but carrying with chilling clarity. It's because the undisclosed partner, the man who secretly funded my son's project and whose lawyer funneled the money, is the one man who could guarantee its success. The man whose commission is required to approve all the zoning changes that make a project like this profitable. I held his gaze across the crowded room. Isn't that right, Mr. Chairman? Marcus Thorne. Absolute silence. A deep, heavy, profound silence that felt like the end of the world. Then, as one, every single head in that ballroom turned to stare at the chairman of the City Zoning Commission. Kevin made a small, choking sound beside me. He looked from me to Thorne, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I calmly stacked my papers, slid them back into the plain manila folder, and closed it with a soft, final thud. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom like a gavel. My audit was complete. I turned and walked off the stage, leaving my son alone in the spotlight with the ruins of his life. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, even pace of a woman who had just clocked out after a very long shift. Behind me, the chaos began to erupt. I heard the first shocked gasp, then a man's angry shout. I heard the scrape of a chair being pushed back violently, the frantic whispers spreading through the room like a grass fire. I kept walking. My eyes were fixed on the big double doors at the back of the ballroom. I didn't look back. Looking back was a luxury I couldn't afford. I pushed through the doors and into the quiet, carpeted lobby of the hotel. The air was cool and still. It felt like another world. I handed my ticket to the valet, a young man who looked at my simple gray dress with a flicker of confusion, probably wondering what a woman like me was doing at a black tie gala. When he brought my 10-year-old Honda around to the front, nestled between a black Porsche and a white Cadillac Escalade, I almost smiled. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to. The silence was filled with the echoes of what I had done. The next morning, I woke up at 6, just like I always do. The sun was streaming through my kitchen window. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar gurgle of the machine a comforting sound in the quiet house. For all the world, it felt like just another Friday. I walked down my driveway in my bathrobe and slippers to pick up the morning paper. And there it was. Above the fold, a headline screamed in thick black letters, "Chamber of Commerce Gala erupts in bribery scandal," and underneath it, a photo that stole the air from my lungs. It was a picture of Kevin, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, his arm held by a man in a dark suit. In the background, out of focus, you could see the Heavy Glass Award for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, abandoned on the podium like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. I carried the paper inside and spread it out on my kitchen table, my hands perfectly steady. I read the article as I sipped my coffee. I was mentioned in the second paragraph. The stunning allegations were made by the developer's own mother, Carol Davis, a retired public school auditor. They had printed my words, my facts, my bullet points. My audit report was now a public record. The story detailed the immediate fallout. Zoning chairman Marcus Thorne had been whisked away by his aides, refusing to comment. Several major investors had been quoted as being deeply concerned and reevaluating their position. My son, Kevin Davis, had been taken in for questioning by the district attorney's office. I turned on the small television on my kitchen counter. Channel 7 News was already live from in front of the Evergreen Point development. A reporter with perfect hair stood in front of the main gate, a microphone in her hand. Behind her, the huge, optimistic sign that read, "The future of luxury living," looked like a cruel joke. A heavy industrial chain and a thick padlock were now wrapped around the gate, and a new official-looking sign had been wired to the chain-link fence. The camera zoomed in. Sight closed. It read in stark red letters, "By order of the district attorney. I now in the fangs are jacted. Ever and the Fangly." The reporter then cut to a pre-taped clip of Kevin's main business partner, the other name on the land deed, being ambushed by journalists in a parking garage. "I had no knowledge of Kevin's financing methods," he shouted, shoving a camera away. "My involvement was purely advisory. No comment." The first rat was already jumping from the sinking ship. My phone, which had been silent all morning, began to ring. I looked at the screen. It was Tiffany. I watched it ring, my finger hovering over the screen. Then, I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed with a notification. I opened the message. Tiffany's voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was now a high-pitched, frantic squeal. "Carol? Carol, pick up the phone! The credit cards aren't working. I tried to pay for groceries and they were all declined." I called the bank, our wealth manager, and they said there's a hold on everything, an asset freeze. Kevin's one phone call was to his lawyer. He didn't even call me. What am I supposed to do? What is happening? The message ended not with a word, but with a raw, desperate sob. I put the phone down. I took another sip of my coffee. It tasted exactly the same as it did every other morning. I looked around my small, quiet house. The worn but comfortable armchair I'd bought at a garage sale, the framed photos of a younger, happier Kevin on the mantelpiece, the handmade quilt from the party, which I had rescued from the patio chair and draped over the back of my sofa. It was a simple life, a life my son had looked down on, a life he had deemed quaint and embarrassing. He had built a beautiful house of cards, all glittering surfaces and empty promises, and I had become the gust of wind that blew it all down. I felt no joy in it. No thrill of victory, just the cold, grim satisfaction of a ledger finally, painfully, balanced. There was a profound sadness in it, a grief for the son I had raised and the man he had chosen to become. But underneath the grief, there was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the television. I saw a 65-year-old woman in a faded bathrobe, in a modest house, with a cup of store-brand coffee. They had it all, the money, the power, the prestige, and now it was all gone. I had none of those things, but I had the one thing they had traded away so cheaply. I had myself, and I knew, in the quiet of that morning, that I was the wealthiest one of all. It's a lesson that took me 65 years to fully understand. It's a lesson Tiffany had to learn in the space of about 2 weeks. I didn't see her again until a month after the gala. She called and asked if we could meet for coffee, not at a trendy downtown cafe, but at a simple diner with vinyl booths and thick, heavy mugs. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The designer dress and the perfect blowout were gone. She wore simple jeans, a plain gray sweater, and no makeup. She looked tired, but she also looked solid, like a statue that had been stripped of its peeling paint, revealing the strong stone underneath. She told me everything that had happened after the fall. The friends who vanished overnight. The bank managers who suddenly wouldn't return her calls. The brutal, humiliating process of selling her designer handbags and jewelry on consignment just to have cash for groceries. She had been forced to leave the big house and was staying in a small, furnished apartment on a month-to-month lease. She had hit the bottom she never knew existed, and from there, she had decided to do one last thing. She told me about her final visit to see my son. The county jail's visitor room, she said, smelled of bleach and despair. It was a long, narrow room, divided down the middle by a wall of thick, scratched plexiglass. She sat on a hard plastic chair that was bolted to the floor and waited. When Kevin was led in on the other side, wearing a baggy, bright orange jumpsuit, her first thought was how small he looked without his expensive suit. The swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, childish anger. They picked up the crackling phone receivers on either side of the glass. He spoke first. "Did you talk to the new lawyer, the bail bondsman? What's taking so long, Tiffany? You have to get me out of here." His voice was a desperate accusatory whine. There was no, "Hello, no, are you okay?" Just demands. "There's no money for a new lawyer, Kevin," she told him, her voice quiet and steady. "There's no money for anything." His face contorted with rage. "What do you mean, there's no money? What about your jewelry? The emergency account?" "The accounts are frozen. The house is in foreclosure. I'm selling my jewelry to pay for rent," she said, not with self-pity, but with the flat finality of an accountant reading a balance sheet. "This is her fault," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. "This is what she wanted. My mother, that bitter, jealous old woman. She was always trying to keep me down. She couldn't stand to see me build something bigger than her pathetic little life." Tiffany told me she just listened. She let him rant, let him spin his web of blame and victimhood, the same web he had trapped her in for years. She watched his face, so handsome and so full of poison, and she felt nothing. The man she thought she had married wasn't there. Maybe he never was. When he finally sputtered to a stop, expecting her to join in, to agree, to soothe him, she took a deep breath. "No, Kevin," she said, her voice clear and calm over the staticky line. "This isn't her fault. You did this. You lied to me. You lied to everyone. You built a fantasy, and you used all of us as building materials." He looked stunned into silence. He had expected an ally, a co-conspirator. He was facing a witness. He tried to change tactics, his voice softening, becoming pleading. "Tiff, baby, don't talk like that. We can fix this. We can get it all back. I just need you to be strong for me, for us." "There is no us anymore," she said. "I'm filing for divorce." He stared at her, his mouth hanging open, the color drained from his face. "You're what?" "You can't leave me. Not now. I'm also enrolling in classes at Northwood Community College," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm going to get my paralegal certificate." He recoiled as if she'd slapped him. "A paralegal? You're going to be a secretary?" He sneered, his voice dripping with the same condescending poison he'd always used on me. It was the worst insult he could imagine. "No," Tiffany said, and she told me a small, sad smile touched her lips. "I'm going to be like your mother, someone who actually understands the rules, and someone who knows the value of an honest day's work." Then she reached into the simple canvas tote bag at her feet. She pulled out the quilt, my quilt. She carefully unfolded it. Even in the harsh, fluorescent glare of that horrible room, the colors were warm and vibrant. She held it up to the plexiglass, a defiant flag of authenticity in a kingdom of lies. "I found this when I was packing up the house," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "It's the only thing we have left that's actually real. The only thing that was built with honest hands and a good heart. Until Yerev never as mever." She pushed the heavy, folded quilt through the small, impersonal slot at the bottom of the divider. It landed in a soft heap on the floor at his feet. "Goodbye, Kevin," she said. She placed the phone receiver back in its cradle. He started banging on the glass then, his face twisted in a mask of rage and panic. He screamed her name, his voice a muffled, distorted roar through the thick barrier. She didn't look back. She just stood up, turned, and walked away, leaving him alone in his orange jumpsuit, with the silent, colorful proof of a love he had never understood and had never deserved. She told me later that as she walked out of the jail and into the bright sunshine, she felt like she could finally breathe again. She had traded a world of glittering lies for a simple, difficult, and honest truth. It took me a while longer to feel that kind of peace. Truth, I've learned, can be a heavy thing to carry, even when it's your own. For months after the gala, my quiet life was filled with the noise of the fallout. Lawyers called. Reporters left notes tucked in my screen door. I was a minor character in the city's biggest scandal, a curiosity, the auditor mom who had brought down her own son. I ignored all of it. I retreated. I needed to find my own quiet again. And I found it, of all places, in the dirt. It's spring now, 6 months later, my garden is a riot of defiant life. The tomato plants are climbing their stakes with a stubborn kind of joy, and the zucchini are already threatening to take over everything. It's not a perfect, manicured garden like the ones Kevin had landscaped at his properties. It's a little wild, a little messy, and everything in it is 100% real. I spend my mornings out here, my hands in the cool, dark soil, feeling the steady, patient rhythm of the seasons. It's here that I finally feel like myself again. Last week, my neighbor from across the street, a sweet widower named George, stopped by the fence while I was weeding my petunias. He was holding a thick, confusing-looking envelope. "Morning, Carol," he said, his face etched with worry. "I hate to bother you, but you know all about numbers and such. The bank sent me this paperwork for a reverse mortgage, and it all sounds so good, but, well, I just don't know." I wiped the dirt from my hands onto my jeans and smiled. "It's no bother at all, George. Come on up to the porch, let's have a look." We sat on my old porch swing, a glass of lemonade between us, and we went through the contract page by page. It was full of the kind of tricks I knew so well: ballooning interest rates hidden in the fine print, exorbitant closing fees, clauses that would leave his children with nothing but a bill. I took out a red pen and circled every single trap. I explained it all in simple terms, not with jargon, but with plain English. I watched the anxiety drain from his face, replaced by a profound, grateful relief. "Good heavens, Carol," he said, shaking his head as he looked at the document, now covered in my red ink. "They almost had me. You're a real lifesaver." The words, the very same words Kevin had used so carelessly, landed differently this time. They were real. They were true. After he left, I went inside to my little desk. I opened a new clean spiral notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "The People's Audit." Underneath it, I made my first entry, George's mortgage. The ledger was open again, but this time, it wasn't for balancing past debts, it was for investing in the future. Kevin took a plea bargain. He'll be in prison for the next 7 to 10 years. Marcus Thorne got 12. I read about it in the paper, but I didn't feel a sense of victory. Just a deep, aching sadness for the boy I used to read bedtime stories to. I haven't visited him. I don't know if I ever will. Some debts are so large there's simply no way to pay them back. You just have to write them off. Tiffany is in her second semester at Northwood. She's getting straight A's. We meet for coffee at the diner sometimes. We don't talk about Kevin. We talk about her contract law class, about my garden, about the future. We are not friends, not really. We are two survivors of the same shipwreck who have found our way to different shores, and we give each other a quiet, respectful nod across the water. I used to think that when I retired, my life's work was over. I thought my story was finished, and that all that was left was a quiet epilogue. I was wrong. My whole life, all those years of patient, thankless, invisible work, wasn't the story. It was just the training. Kevin looked at my life and saw something small, gray, and useless. He had no idea that the skills I'd honed in obscurity, the quiet attention to detail, the relentless belief that things must add up, were the most powerful things I owned. He tried to build his life like one of his condo towers, all glittering glass and steel, built on a corrupt foundation. He didn't understand that true strength is built slowly, out of small, honest pieces, like the scraps of fabric in a quilt. The world will try to tell you who you are. It will try to label you as old, or quaint, or irrelevant. It will try to dismiss your life's experience as a story that's already been told. But your experience, every quiet victory and every painful lesson, is your superpower. It's the one asset no one can freeze, the one value no one can take away. My son's story was a book of lies, bound in expensive leather. My story is simpler, written in a cheap spiral notebook. So, let me ask you, if life handed you a brand new, unwritten page, would you have the courage to write your own truth on it? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.